Converted man here?
It's the converted man.
Converted man here.
You know, a lot of atheists will always claim the science and claim that atheism is logical and reasonable. So today we're going to talk a lot less about Christianity and a lot more about atheism. We are going to scientifically put atheism to the test using logic, reasoning, and evidence. We are going to see if Christianity is true or false by looking at if atheism is fiction.
Okay, for those of you who couldn't hear over the music, he said something to the effect of that we're going to test atheism using science and logic and show that it's false, and therefore that Christianity is true. Now, I didn't get everything he said, so I think he might have said that we're also going to test Christianity with logic and science. I'm not sure. But this is a false dichotomy. Even if we could disprove atheism as utterly, completely false, that doesn't mean that the default then is Christianity, because there's plenty of other religions out there to choose from, and there's plenty of other deities out there to choose from. And so even if we could show that there is a deity, we haven't answered the question of what deity that is.
So here are a lot of common phrases that atheists love to say. One of the most common phrases that a lot of atheists will say, which is a logical fallacy. Well, in case you guys don't know what a logical fallacy is a fallacious argument used in a debate that when you first hear it, it doesn't really sound that bad, but when you really look at it, it's fallacious. So, a lot of atheists love to say, you gave no evidence. That wasn't evidence. Or what they really mean is that evidence wasn't good enough. That's called the fallacy. It's entirely possible to make a claim that's false and yet argue with logical coherency for that claim. Just as it is possible to make a claim that is true and justify it with various fallacies and poor arguments. So, just because somebody poorly argues something about a claim, it doesn't make the claim false. It just means that the argument was argued very poorly.
He got it right! He got it right. I'm not dreaming. This is reality, right? Wow! He got it right! Ah! Amazing! It's a miracle! From Lobster Original Deity. Okay, so, yeah, that's correct. But there's a little bit more that I have to add to that. Okay, so, if atheist says you've provided no evidence, or you haven't provided sufficient evidence, or enough evidence, or however they might say that, that is a statement that, from their side, seems to be true, and from your side might not seem to be true. Regardless, the conclusion of the argument could be true, even if the argument is fallacious, and conversely, the conclusion of the argument might be false, even if the argument is constructed correctly. However, if the argument contains one or more logical fallacies, it is not a logically coherent argument. There's a difference between a logical formatted argument and a coherent argument. A coherent argument flows from first to last, including the conclusion, with zero fallacies along the way. And the premises all work, they're all true, and the conclusion follows and is also probably most likely true, and you should then investigate that conclusion further. When there is a logical fallacy, you have to be skeptical of the conclusion. Even if the conclusion is right, you have to be skeptical of it within logic. Now, let's say I argued for the existence of light bulbs, and it was full of logical fallacies. We know for a fact that light bulbs exist, but within the constraints of informal logic, you should doubt the conclusion of my argument. And I should revise it. You should say, here's the logical fallacies. I should go back and fix those fallacies so that I have a logically coherent argument. Otherwise, I have a bad argument, and nobody can trust my conclusion. So, what if the converse is true? What if we had a logically coherent argument and the conclusion is false? There's only one way to know that. And the only way to know that is to step outside the realm of logic and to examine the conclusion independent of informal logic, which would require science or some other empirical method, some sort of test that we could run on it. And that would be it. Logic has its limits there. So, but you get to be skeptical of that conclusion, and thus, until you're given a coherent argument, you don't have to think that the conclusion is true if you don't want to, or if you don't see any other reason to. In fact, logic dictates that you should be skeptical of the conclusion. Not that the conclusion is false, mind you, but that you should be skeptical of it. And there's a big difference there.
Another common phrase that atheists love to say is, well, you can't use the Bible. Well, that's called cherry picking or suppressing evidence. It's the act of pointing to individual cases or data that seem to confirm a particular position while ignoring a significant portion of related cases or data that may contradict that position.
Typically, if an atheist and or skeptic says this, what they're really saying is, until you establish that the Bible is a reliable source of information, you can't point to it as a source of information. In other words, you can't use the Bible to prove that the Bible is true. To do so is circular reasoning. I'm going to tell you all about God. Let me do that by opening my Bible. Wait. Tell me how you know that the Bible is true and factual in the first place before we even get to that point. Once you've established that the Bible is true and factual, then you can utilize it as a piece of evidence in your argumentation. Until you can show that it is evidence, it shouldn't be considered.
Another logical fallacy that atheists love to do. It's called the ad hominem. It's basically when you name call.
No, name calling in and of itself is not an ad hominem. I can call you an idiot, Nimrod, douchebag, whatever, and it's completely irrelevant. It shouldn't be done, but it's relevant to the debate, and it might make me seem like less of a debater, but it is not in and of itself a logical fallacy. Until I say something to the effect of, my opponent is an idiot, therefore he is wrong. That is an attack against the person rather than their argument. It might be true that my opponent is a complete and utter idiot, but that's irrelevant. If I say, my opponent is a known serial killer, again, irrelevant. It might be true, but it has no bearing on the argument. If I call you a name, just ignore it. It doesn't matter, because it's irrelevant. It only becomes the logical fallacy of an ad hominem if I try to attach the name calling to, therefore you're wrong about your conclusion. Okay? If somebody says you're a moron and that's why you're wrong about this, then yes, that's an ad hominem. If someone just says you're a moron, it's not an ad hominem. It's just name calling. But you can tell them that they've at least committed the formal fallacy of shifting the dialogue from persuasionary into heuristic dialogue. You can do that. Unless they actually do the ad hominem, you can't say that they've done the ad hominem, okay? And some may or may not do this, and suggesting that many or most do this might be poisoning of the well, but I'll reserve judgment upon that until you actually say that all atheists are doing this, and you're not saying that, so I'll let that go for now.
And one of the last logical fallacies that atheists love to make is the personal incredulity. Because someone finds something difficult to understand, you made it out like their claim is not true. So, one example is, oh, Christians don't understand science, therefore they're wrong. No, that doesn't mean our claim is wrong just because we don't understand.
And you've got this one wrong. So sorry to tell you, you did great on the first one and lousy on everything else. Personal incredulity is when I cannot believe X is true. It's like, whoa, that's too fantastic. That's too bizarre. I just can't believe it. It's just unfathomable. I can't think that that's true. That's personal incredulity, is to dismiss an idea purely because it does not make sense to you. If somebody says to you as a Christian, you do not understand science, that may or may not be true, and then follows that with, therefore you're wrong about science, that too also might be true. But that's not personal incredulity. They're claiming that you lack knowledge on a subject, therefore you are not qualified to speak on that subject, which is a valid critique to make. If somebody doesn't know about something, perhaps they shouldn't be talking or writing about it as much as they are. Now that doesn't mean we can't have casual conversations, but it should come with some sort of note that I don't know that much or anything about science. For example, let's say Ray Comfort loves to make all these DVDs about evolution being a lie, and he has absolutely zero knowledge of biological evolution. He's been told multiple times what it is, tried to been explained to him. He doesn't want to understand it. When King Crocodile confronted him, Ray was like, use small words. He couldn't understand the big terms that were being presented at him. He's deliberately and woefully ignorant, and yet he makes DVDs and propaganda against evolution, which he does not understand. He shouldn't be talking about it because he doesn't understand anything about it. If he actually knew stuff about it, then he could talk about it. But he doesn't, so he shouldn't. Personal incredulity would be like you say, I just can't believe evolution is true. Why? You've given no reason. So I just can't believe it's true. That's personal incredulity.
So, here are the common logical fallacies that atheists love to make. And if atheism is logical, then you can't make a logical fallacy, because then that wouldn't be consistent with your atheism.
I find it so odd that the one logical fallacy that you got right, which is the fallacy, is the one that you now invoke at the end to try to dismantle atheism as a whole. By saying that many or most or all atheists make these logical errors, these logical fallacies, or they like to do these logical fallacies, that therefore somehow they're wrong, is the fallacy, which is what you've implied in what you said. Additionally, you have a straw man here, because you're assuming that atheism is some sort of entity into of itself, that to be an atheist one must do X, in this case always be logically consistent. And that's not the case at all, because atheism doesn't dictate any terms at all. It isn't a worldview and doesn't have any doctrine to follow. Atheism is simply without God, nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't tell you anything else about the person or the group of people calling themselves an atheist or atheists. It doesn't tell you whether or not that individual is going to know anything about logic or science or anything about anything at all, for that matter. Perhaps they're a car mechanic, and that's all they know is how to fix cars, and they can fix them really well, and they'll fix them better than anyone else. But when it comes to every other subject, they don't know diddly squat, but they're an atheist. Why are they an atheist? Well, they just don't see God around in the workshop, so that's why they're an atheist. Every atheist is going to have a different reason why they're an atheist. That's this guy's reason. Okay? His one reason and his lack of logical arguments is irrelevant to the conclusion. His conclusion may or may not be true. We get to be skeptical of it because he didn't offer us an argument, and in fact, in that case, we have a formal fallacy, failure to give an argumentation, so we have nothing to go on. Although he gave us kind of an argument, I just don't see God. That's a type of argument. But nonetheless, he could still be right. There could still not be a God because he doesn't see it. So, trying to think that atheism has some sort of idea to it, other than we all agree that we don't believe in God, that's it, is completely and utterly a straw man, simply untrue. Many atheists, unfortunately, don't understand logic. I would love if we all understood informal logic, but that's just simply not the case.
Science says nothing, scientists do, literally. What do I mean by that? In 1908, the first Neanderthal was found in France. And first, Neanderthals were considered to be ignorant, ape-like, stooped, and knuckle-dragging people. And much of the evidence actually suggests that, well, these people actually believed in the afterlife. They were skilled hunters, and they even were skilled surgeons because, well, the evidence showed that one skeleton, whose withered right arm had been amputated above the elbow. This comes from the Time magazine in May 17, 1971. This isn't a Christian source, but I wonder why a lot of atheists haven't heard about this. Neanderthals.
The year is now 2015. Your source is outdated. Also, it's unscientific because Time magazine is not a scientific publication, no matter how much they want people to think that it is. It isn't a scientific publication at all, in any way, shape, or form. You cannot cite it and say, oh, look, I found this art. It's not science. Popular mechanics, a little bit more scientific, but still, I don't know. I think some people would say that's really not either a scientific publication. There are scientific publications. Time magazine is not one of them. Shame on you. And also way outdated. Way outdated. And this is also completely a red herring. Because so what? What's your point? What does this have to do with anything else? I don't know. But I guess we'll see if you actually have some sort of connection with what you were just talking about, but I seriously doubt it. I'm going to call it a red herring. I'll retract it if you actually show that this connects in some way, shape, or form to your argument as a whole.
The people were stupid. They actually were skilled hunters. They actually did surgery. And they were so smart, they believed in an afterlife. That shows you how dumbed down humanity has gotten if you don't believe in one.
So, let me get this right. Ancient man knew how to do surgery, according to your outdated source material, and believed in an afterlife, and supposedly believed in God, although I don't know whether or not that's in there or not, but let's just go along with that. And they were smart. We thought that they were stupid at first, then we realized that they were smart. But now that many humans don't believe in God, we're dumb. many things that the ancient people did is no longer practiced today. Sacrifices of humans or of animals to appease the gods, which is something that they did in those days. But let's take the Mayans for an example, a very advanced race for their time. Beautiful buildings that are still standing today. We don't know what happened to them. We just know that they're gone. So they weren't that smart, but they were pretty smart. And they believed in a deity, and they also believed that the deity had to be appeased by human sacrifice, which usually involved cutting somebody's head off and having it rolled downstairs. So we must be dumb because we don't believe that anymore, right? Yeah. This is faulty logic on your part. But it's not an argument, so I'm just going to assign you a failure to give an argumentation as a formal fallacy.
Nebraska man. A single tooth discovered in Nebraska in 1922. It grew an entire evolutionary link between man and monkey until another identical tooth was found, which protruding from the jawbone of a wild pig. You know, if science actually validates atheism, why do so many atheists feel as if they have to make hoaxes? Maybe because even they know in their heart of hearts and in their conscience that atheism is false.
Well, now you've gone and done it. You've committed 3 fallacies in a row. So, red herring, because this has nothing to do with anything else other than science. Poisoning of the well, because you're suggesting that somehow atheism is involved with this supposed hoax. And then special knowledge, when you say that atheists know in the heart of their hearts that they're wrong. Hoaxes occur within archaeological things because there's money to be made occasionally. Very seldomly within the scientific community, hoaxes happen as well. However, in every single case, they have been shown to be a hoax. And since we're talking about hoaxes, why don't we talk about Titus Flavius Josephus, who was a historian and had written a lot of things, and then later somebody penned in a whole bunch of forgeries that made it seem like he knew about Jesus and supported it, and it was obvious forgeries, and it was done at least twice. So if we're going to talk about hoaxes, let's talk about hoaxes. So if one hoax in the scientific community, which is not connected with atheism necessarily, it might be, I don't know about this particular dig or discovery or whatnot, but perhaps they were funded by an atheist organization. More than likely they were not. But still, if we're going to talk about hoaxes and say one hoax equals that the whole thing is thrown out and it's all false, then that one forgery, actually 2 forgeries, makes Christianity absolutely false. Not to mention all the different changes that have been made in the Bible itself. So yeah, let's talk about hoaxes, okay? You don't want to do that because you have far more to account for than the scientific community does. As far as atheism, it has nothing to do with that problem of that particular hoax at all, unless you can show a direct correlation that an atheist group funded that expedition and funded that hoax. Otherwise, you've got nothing.
Charles Darwin on the origin of species by means of natural selection. Oh, wait, that wasn't the whole title. The whole title was, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Ouch. Charles Darwin was a racist.
It doesn't change the ideas that he had, and it doesn't change that the ideas that we've had since then and have revised over time. We know a lot more than Darwin did in his day. Some of his ideas and some of his hypotheses and theories were valid. Some have been overturned by modern biology. An ad hominem against Darwin is akin to me saying that Hitler was a Christian. Hitler was a Christian. So what? Doesn't mean anything. Darwin might have been a racist. I don't know. So what? Doesn't mean anything.
Charles Darwin was racist. Charles Darwin came up with this idea that there were lesser human races than others, weaker people. Did he really think that they should not be helped and that they should potentially be sterilized or exterminated? Please listen to the words of Charles Darwin himself.
With savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated, and those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. We institute poor laws, and our medical men exert their utmost skill to save the life of everyone to the last moment. There is reason to believe that vaccination has preserved thousands who, from a weak constitution, would formerly have succumbed to smallpox. Thus, the weak members of civilized societies propagate their kind. No one who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. It is surprising how soon a want of care, or care wrongly directed, leads to the degeneration of a domestic race. But excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. Charles Darwin, Descent of Man.
Alright, so this is all irrelevant because what Charles Darwin believed or wrote is nothing to do with atheism at all. It's also cherry picking from Charles Darwin's books, and it's an ad hominem because you're attacking the person of Darwin rather than his arguments. And you've shifted the topic because you're now talking about a different book that he wrote rather than The Origin of Species. So, yeah, I don't care about any of this. Get back to the topic of atheism, because I don't know where you are or why you're talking about Darwin. He has nothing to do with atheism whatsoever.
So, science doesn't claim atheism. A lot of atheists love to claim science, and they love to claim science as the father of their non-belief.
Give me some examples of atheists that have said this. Citations are required. But I'm going to call this a straw man.
And that's just me trying to be nice. Well, science wants an emancipation. Science 2.0. Scientists discover that atheists might not exist. And that's not a joke. Once again, this isn't a Christian source. This is your source. These are your people telling you that you might not even exist. Ouch. I would hate to be an atheist right now.
So once again, we have cherry picking, and I have the odd formal fallacy of not enough data, because I now have to go and look at this entire article and see if it is actually a scientific publication or not. He might have provided the link in his description of his video, I don't know offhand, but still, he hasn't provided us enough data on this full article, who wrote it, what it says, etc. So, for that reason, he gets a formal fallacy. But it's definitely cherry picking, because all he shows us is the main header. That's it.
Uniformity. Uniformity is the state or quality of being uniform, overall sameness, homogeneity, or regularity, uniformity of style. What does that mean? It means that something being repeated over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. So, why am I bringing this up? You will see. Watch this. Atheism relies on 4 assumptions. Here are the 4 assumptions that atheism relies on. These are the 4 of them. Atheism assumes reality is real. Atheism assumes that their reasoning is valid. Atheism assumes that there is uniformity in nature. Atheism assumes that atheism is true.
No, 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 and no. And hello, cat in the background that I heard meowing twice. Meow, meow. Everyone, all humans, must assume reality is real. This is an a priori belief. It is stated as an a priori belief. Philosophers have toyed with this notion, of course. Some philosophers have toyed with the idea that reality isn't real and that we can't know anything at all except that we exist, and some have even toyed with that notion as well. Yeah, I assume reality is real. So what? You do as well. We have no choice in the matter. I have no reason to think that reality isn't real currently, so reality is real until it is demonstrated to not be real in some way, shape, or form. It's an a priori belief that most humans do adhere to, and we have no choice in the matter. It's not a requirement of atheism at all. Everything that you have here is construct straw man. The second construct straw man that we assume that reasoning is valid, no. We see that reasoning is all that we have, and we see that it can produce results. Thus, we know that it is valid. We don't have to assume that it's valid. My reasoning is based upon inference, but it is also based upon informal logic, as well as some principles of science, as well as some principles in philosophy as well. But I don't have to assume that it's valid. I can know that it's valid because it can demonstrate consistent results every time I test it. If I get a different result, then my reasoning is invalid and I have to change what I thought about whatever phenomenon it was. Assuming that there's uniformity in nature is not something that is within atheism. It is something within science and philosophy. And we don't assume it, we observe it. We observe it every single day, and it has been observed and it has been recorded, and it is demonstrably demonstratable over and over again that it is constant. And so we base the idea that since it's constant, it's going to stay constant. And so far, that idea has proven to be true over and over again. The last one is false and a construct straw man. I don't assume, personally, that atheism is true. My being an atheist is a result of me being a skeptic. Some people just say atheist, some people say agnostic, whatever label you want. I don't believe in God. I don't assume that there is no God. I just don't believe in it. I do not assume that my non-belief is true. I simply do not believe. I could be wrong, and I'm willing to be shown that I'm wrong. And there are 3 ways in which anyone at any time could demonstrate that I am wrong. Let's get his construct strawmans off the screen so I can put up the logical fallacy counter, because he accumulated a whole bunch. Here we go. So these are 4 construct strawmans, and I think that he's getting slippery slope wrong 4 times. I haven't watched his entire video as yet. As I analyze, I go along so that I can be surprised by the next segment. I'm guessing here that he's getting slippery slope wrong 4 times. If I'm incorrect, and the slippery slope is correct, then I'll withdraw that. But I'm basing that guess on his previous errors that he has made already in this video. Atheism doesn't require much of anything, to be honest. The very basic, what's called often the town atheist, is the guy or gal that is in town and says, I don't see God, so I'm not going to believe in God. And that's the very basic argument. I don't see it, I'm not going to believe it. If you can't show me it, I'm not going to believe it. And that doesn't seem horribly unreasonable to me, but it is the simplest argument that one could have. That's all it really requires is observation. Nothing more or less. Theism has to work backwards from science. Science doesn't assume anything. Science discovers along the way what is true by observing the reality that is around us to the best of our ability, measuring it, testing it, recording data, having other people do that so that we can compare and contrast data and make sure that we're getting the right results, and so on and so forth. It is a system that has proven itself over and over again and has absolutely nothing to do with atheism, because the two are separate. Some people have become atheists because of their interest in science. I didn't. But certainly my interest in science has grown since becoming an atheist, because I'm interested in this universe that we exist in, and I want to learn more about reality. Theism has made up its mind on what reality is and has to argue backwards from that position. There's this type of God, and in order to prove that that's true, we have to work backwards to get to where we want to start from. So if there is a deity out there, science should be able to find it. But if there isn't, then we won't find it. But theists will say, well, no. See, God's above science or beyond science. So how do you know that? There's no way for you to know that, because there's no access to that realm. If you don't have a methodology, then you have nothing but faith, which isn't true necessarily. You might be right accidentally. You might guess and be right by chance, but you might not be. And I would rather know that something is true rather than guess that something is true. But that's just me. Back to his video.
Now, you guys are seeing slippery slope. You guys are probably like, what the heck is slippery slope? Well, this is slippery slope. Slippery slope is a logical fallacy, and this logical fallacy is, well, when people assume that if we allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should happen. Now, in atheism, atheists love to go off of evidence. So atheism assumes that reality is real. Right. So, based off the evidence, sure, we could say reality is real in an atheistic worldview, but the problem is you assume A because of B, and C because of D, and D because of E, and so on and so forth. But what happens when you get to Z? Do you go back to A? That's called circular reasoning. So if you assume reality is real based off A to B and C to D, well, you just made a slippery slope logical fallacy.
That's not what a slippery slope fallacy is. If A occurs, then B, bad thing, will happen. Therefore, we cannot allow A to occur. If we teach evolution in schools, children will stop believing in God. Therefore, we shouldn't teach evolution in schools. That's a slippery slope fallacy. If we allow homosexuals to get married, then the next thing we'll have to allow is for multiple people to get married. that's a slippery slope fallacy. So no, you're wrong about that. And you're also wrong about circular reasoning. Assuming that reality is real is an a priori belief that we have no choice but to have. A few philosophers out there don't hold that, but I'm not one of those. It is not circular reasoning to assume that reality is real, or that the evidence that we can gather within reality is evidence. If you think that that's circular reasoning, you're just simply wrong. So you've gotten these two logical fallacies utterly, completely wrong. Go read a logic book. I strongly suspect that you're pulling your information about logical fallacies from a website of some sort. And that's all fine and good, but if you don't really understand the mechanics behind it, you're gonna screw up like you have been so far. So I would implore you, and I'll even help you, to study logic. Back to the video.
Atheism assumes that their reasoning is valid. That's another assumption. You assume your reasoning is valid because, well, you look from your eyes and you're saying, oh, well, the reason why I'm seeing this is because this and that and blah, 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 and this, that, and the third. But how do you know that your eyes aren't playing tricks on you? Because if you go and you put a stick in some water, and then you look from over top of the water, and you see the stick, it looks like the stick is bending. But it's not. Your eyes are telling you the stick is bending, but how do you know the stick really isn't bending?
That's not reasoning, that's observation, and the two are different. If I observe that it appears that the stick is bent when it's in water, I can go and see if the stick is truly bent by taking it out of the water, by doing a test upon a real object, and then I say, hey, the stick isn't bent when it's in the water, but it is when it is in the water. Something is going on here, and I might not know what it is. Is the water bending the stick? Okay, let me put my finger in there with the stick. No, it's not, because I would feel it bending. So I'm testing it now using my reasoning. You got this completely and utterly wrong.
How do you know your reasoning is valid? Atheism assumes that there is uniformity in nature. So,
Wait, sorry. I didn't cover everything. How do I know that my senses, which are different than my reasoning, are functioning properly? The answer is, I don't. Neither do you. I actually should be wearing glasses, but I don't wear them all the time. I noticed that things were getting blurry, whereas before they weren't blurry. So I went to an eye doctor and got glasses, and I sometimes wear them. I should wear them all the time, but I just don't because it hurts my head, and if I wore them all the time, I would get used to them, but yeah. Anyways, so my eyes weren't working perfectly, and I happened to notice. But that's not always the case. My brother's hearing started to lose. He started to lose his hearing. At first, he didn't notice it. But eventually, he did notice it. But he didn't want it to be true at first, so he denied that he was losing his hearing. He was just thinking that maybe I'm just not paying attention to people. But then he realized, no, I am losing my hearing, and he went to a doctor and got hearing aids, which he doesn't always use. Man, both of us are really bad about not using the things that we should be using. But your senses can malfunction, and you cannot self-diagnose many of them. Some of them you can, but many of them you cannot. It requires a different person to assess you properly. When you get injured, you go to a doctor because you can't self-diagnose what your injury is. A while back, I tried to jump on my bed like an idiot, and I fell on the floor, and I hit my rear end, and it hurt like bleep, and then my toes started tingling, and I thought that there was puffy water in there, and I was scared out of my mind, and I didn't know what to do, so I went to the ER, and he gave me anti-inflammatory medication, and that fixed it. All it was a pinched nerve. There was no water, there was nothing else going on. I didn't know, but he did, because he has the expertise. I can't self-diagnose. When I got my arm broken years and years ago, I knew that it was broken immediately. I'm not sure how I knew that, but I did. I know my arm's broken. Because I was pushed off this very tall thing by a bully, and it got broken, and I ran and I got help. But I knew instantly it was broken, but there might be some sensory input that allowed me to know that I'm not aware of. But in many and in most cases, you cannot self-diagnose. If you mentally lose your mind and you start hallucinating, and that is noticed by somebody else, that you're not acting within the bell curve of normal that they've come to expect, they'll take you to a doctor. The doctor will figure out this is a mental problem, not a medical one. Send you to a psychologist, get you some drugs meant to fix whatever chemistry is going wrong, and all of a sudden now you're not hallucinating and you're back to perceiving reality as you were before, hopefully. But you can never know what senses are or are not working. None of us can. We need somebody else to help us to diagnose ourselves. We can't self-diagnose in many cases. And that's the reality that we're stuck in. All of us. Every single one of us. We go about our daily lives and we all assume that the way that we perceive reality is right. Now there are people that have, and I'm going to mispronounce it, synesthesia. Can't pronounce that word. Where they see color and hear sound, or they hear sound and see color, or they see color and they taste something, or they hear a sound and they can taste something, or a combination thereof. Their senses are connected within their brain. It's an interesting phenomenon. For that person, the color red might be cinnamon. And conversely, cinnamon might be the color red. And that's their internal reality. But it's not the nature of reality, at least as far as we know. Red doesn't smell like anything. But that's based on the idea that none of the majority of the population sees red and smells cinnamon. But perhaps the real reality is that red is cinnamon, and these guys and gals are the only one perceiving the real reality. And the only way we could find out would be with scientific testing that removes as much as possible the human element, and to have some sort of sensory equipment that can detect smell and see if red smells like cinnamon, and lo and behold, it doesn't. Therefore, this is a product of their brain and is not in our reality. It is in their brain only, and not in the reality that actually exists. And for all you know, you could be walking around and your green might be a slightly different shade of green than my green. We don't know. And without testing, we couldn't know. If we are functioning well enough to walk around and eat and prepare meals and to work and to make videos, then our sensory inputs are probably working okay. But we might have a mental disability and be unaware of it. I know YouTubers who are aware of their mental issues and disabilities, whatever you might want to call it. I know a schizophrenic who is taking medication for that. They are aware when reality has stopped being real, because they can tell the difference now. At one point in time, they weren't able to tell the difference, I would think, but through medication and therapy and such, now they can tell the difference. We need help sometimes, which proves that our sensory inputs are not perfect, which is explainable via biological evolution. But what you're trying to do is make this a philosophical issue. Say, well, you can't trust your senses some of the time. Therefore, you have to assume that they're working. Yeah, I do, and so do you. And so let's test and see if our claim, whatever it is, matches each other. So if I claim that if I drop something it will fall, then let's see if that happens. We both do it, it both works, we both see that it falls, okay. We've got something that's verifiable. When someone makes a claim that they cannot demonstrate with some sort of repeatable test or empirical evidence, we doubt that claim. The only thing left for them would be a logically coherent argument. I'm waiting for you to give that, because you certainly haven't produced empirical evidence or a repeatable test as yet.
Basically, the best way I can put it is in this
I think that
video.
Truth is one of those things that makes itself known and that it's obvious.
No, I'm not going to deal with Seidenberger Gate. I've already dealt with him. I, along with Karen S., analyzed his debate with Matt Dillahunty. He had over 200 logical fallacies as well as a number of formal ones. He doesn't comprehend logic, and he doesn't have an argument. He has a question. How do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? The problem is that Seidenberger Gate doesn't know that how he knows anything. And he is not a source that I find credible, and I have nothing more to say on him, so I'm skipping this portion of the video. You can complain about that if you want to in your response to this video, but no, I'm just not going to deal with Seidenberger. I spent 2 hours plus already dealing with him, so I'm skipping this. Moving on.
Last thing, atheism assumes that atheism is true. Well, that's really biased. If you go and you get some evidence, an atheist will look at that evidence from an atheistic worldview because they're already assuming from the get-go that their atheism is true. That's not observant evidence. That's making an assumption that the evidence will turn out in your favor.
So this is a straw man and poisoning of the well. Atheists do not necessarily assume that atheism is true, and that might seem odd to you because I don't think that you understand what the word atheist is. But nonetheless, I will attempt in my best effort to explain it. I don't believe in God. That's atheism. That's it. Somebody that lacks a belief in a God, somebody that doesn't believe in God, someone that thinks that there is no God is also an atheist, by definition. I don't know that there is no God. I don't know that there is a God. That's called... And I don't know even what a God is, or if such a thing is even a thing at all. The best category I put myself into is skeptic, and because I'm a skeptic, I'm also an atheist and agnostic and some other stuff as well, I'm sure. The labels don't really matter to me. Call me whatever you want. I don't care. But it's not something that I assume is true. I don't know. But I doubt things that I have no empirical evidence for, no repeatable test for, and no logically coherent argument for. If I had one or all three of those things, I don't doubt it. When I look at my computer screen and the words that are on it and the fact that I'm recording my voice right now, I don't doubt that those things are occurring. But I look around my room and I see no God. And if I ask God to do the very basic thing of levitating an object off of my table, God will not do that. No matter how sincere I ask, no matter how much I beg, no matter how many people ask, it will not happen. God will never regenerate an amputee instantaneously. That won't happen. Now, my conclusion that I can draw from this is perhaps God doesn't answer prayers, or perhaps God doesn't have the power to answer prayers, or perhaps God doesn't care enough to answer prayers, or some combination thereof. Also, I could draw the conclusion that God doesn't exist. Any one of these is a logical conclusion drawn from the fact that I have no empirical evidence and no test to run. That leaves me only with a logically coherent argument, which I don't have yet. You certainly haven't produced one yet.
That's called being dishonest. Now, if you want to call yourself an atheist, you can assume that atheism is true, because atheism says, I don't know if there is a God. I don't know if there is a God for sure, but I don't know. That's what atheism says.
So wait, it is okay to call yourself an atheist, but it's dishonest? Huh? Which is it? I don't understand. What's your argument here? You don't have one. Failure to give an argument.
So, the problem is, if you call yourself an atheist, you need to call yourself an agnostic. Meaning, atheists really don't exist.
I saw what you did there. I don't care what the bleep you call it. I really don't. Doesn't matter. This whole name game, I already talked about this. I did a meme series. You're not an atheist, you're agnostic. So just look at that video. Whatever, man. It doesn't matter what you want to say. I don't believe in God. There you go. It doesn't change it. Whatever you want to call it, doesn't change the fact that I don't believe what you believe. Okay? Call me whatever you want.
There are agnostic atheists, but you can't be an atheist because atheism has to say, I don't know. Because if you assume that atheism is true, well then, that's a logical fallacy because you don't know for sure.
Not knowing for sure is not a logical fallacy. At best, what you're aiming for would be an appeal to ignorance or personal incredulity. But what you just said, the words that you just said, are not a logical fallacy. Okay? But you can be an atheist. You get to, because it's just without God. That's all. Period. You don't even have to say I don't know to that. If you want to declare there is no God, you can do that. Just like people declare that there is a God. They should give an argument, but they might not. I would like them to, but they might not. You're not giving me any argument at all most of the time, and then when you try to give me an argument, it's full of logical fallacies, so I have to be skeptical of it. If there is an atheist out there that says there is no God, then they ought to have a logically coherent argument and or reasons why that statement should be considered true. That's all. It's not that difficult. You could call yourself whatever you want, and you don't make the rules on what we get to call ourselves. Moving on.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Appeal to celebrity. Ben Stein's a celebrity, thus whatever he says should be something that we care about, right? I don't care about Ben Stein. Don't care what he says. Don't care what he thinks, because he doesn't have an argument. He just believes in God, and he made a stupid documentary that was full of logical fallacies, outright lies, and other problems as well. He's anti-evolution, and I don't care about him at all. Make your own argument. Don't rely on somebody else to make the argument for you. Moving on.
B because of C, and, well, B because of E, and then when you get to Z, you go back to A. So that's circular reasoning.
I don't know why you're making circular reasoning more complicated than it needs to be, and you're getting it wrong. Okay, you're just getting it wrong. The easiest example is the Bible says it's true, therefore the Bible is true. That's circular reasoning. Okay? God exists because without God, I can't make sense of anything else. That's circular reasoning. Those are two examples of circular reasoning. Moving on.
Now, how can atheists validate their atheism? By coming up with one piece of evidence that will prove atheism for good, that will prove that there is no God for good. But unfortunately, if that were true, if any evidence were that good for atheism, we all would be atheists. Now, wouldn't we?
Shifting the burden of proof and the fact that universal negatives can't be proven. There is no way to prove a universal negative. That is to say, I cannot prove there are no leprechauns. I cannot prove that there are no pixies or giants or unicorns, goblins, orcs, or dragons. I cannot prove that those things do not exist, because those are universal negatives that I cannot prove. I can give an argument, but an argument is not proof other than within its own logical system, logical proof. Cannot give empirical proof because the thing isn't there to show you that it isn't there. So we'd have to go everywhere, and then you would shift the goalposts and say, well, it's just the last place we didn't look. Okay? So you cannot prove a universal negative. That's just a fact. Nobody can. You've shifted the burden because the burden of proof is not on us, it is on you. You have made the claim that there is a thing called a deity, called a god, a particular type, a particular version. It is up to you to provide the empirical evidence, repeatable test, or logically coherent argument for that claim. If you will not or cannot, then we must be skeptical of that claim. That's it. When it comes to every other God claim that's ever been or ever will be, you don't believe those. You believe those are false. Correct? I don't want to make a straw man here, but I would assume that you don't think that Zeus is real. In fact, I would go as far to as assume that you believe that Zeus never was real and could never be real. But you can't prove that Zeus doesn't exist, because it's a universal negative. In fact, you can't prove that I'm not God. And you might say, well, wait a minute. Of course I can. No, you can't. God can't be tested. God is mysterious. God can take any form it chooses at any time it chooses, and God can interact with its creation in any way it wants, including telling its creation that there is no God. There's no way for you to disprove I'm God. But that's the bad news. The good news is the burden is on me to prove that I'm that. Get your logic correct and try again. Moving on. Hold on. Wait, before I move on. Let me ask you this, and I want an honest answer, which I don't know what to expect from you at this point if you actually have watched this long. Let's just say, hypothetically, that I had proof beyond a shadow of a doubt, empirical evidence, repeatable tests, logically coherent arguments, that there was no God. Would you stop believing in God at that point? Yes or no? Just want an honest answer. Some Christians have said that no matter what, they would never stop believing. I don't know if you're one of those type of Christians. I'm just interested to know as a side point. Nothing to do with anything else. Just a matter of curiosity.
And we have a world filled with Buddhists and Hindus and Sheiks and Muslims and Jews and Christians. Everybody is an atheist. Why is that? If it's so true, if atheists have so much great evidence, how come I'm still a Christian?
I think you misspoke in this section here. You said, okay, we have a world full of Hindus and Buddhists, etc. How come everyone's atheists? I'm sure that you meant to say, how come everyone isn't an atheist instead? And then you asked the question, why are you still a Christian? I don't know. Don't know your reasons for being a Christian. Perhaps you were born and raised around Christianity. Perhaps some experience happened that you couldn't explain, so your brain latched onto Christianity as the best explanation for that experience. Perhaps you just enjoy the rituals of it. I don't know. You tell me why you're a Christian. As far as arguments against Christianity, I could give them to you. I don't think that they would matter to you, but I could certainly provide you with ample arguments and evidence against many of the Bible stories, but not all of them, because many of them just don't have any traces. There's an absence of evidence. I could tell you the facts, but you might not accept the facts. I'll do it if you want me to. If you ask, other atheists might do it as well. But I would rather you research the matter yourself. Have you explored your own religion? That is to say, beyond just the Bible. Because it's an English version, and depending on which English version, it might not be a very good one. There's multiple different versions, different translations available. How deep have you gone into your own religion, its history? How much have you looked at the archaeological evidence, if there is any? Have you studied the culture and the people of the time where this came from? Do you know Hebrew? Do you know Aramaic? Do you know Greek? If the Bible is important to you, have you read the whole thing? Have you memorized it? Can you name all the disciples from memory? Can you name both versions of all 10 commandments from memory? Can you quote any passage from the Bible verbatim from memory? And can you do that with every single version? No? Probably not. Is your belief a passive thing, like, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, that's all I really need, I don't need to know anything more? Or are you really serious and committed to finding out as much as you can about your own religion, all the different doctrines in it, all the different theologies of it, and the history of it? See, I was a Christian, and I made that journey to look for the evidence myself. I didn't want just faith. I wanted facts. That's why I'm a skeptic now, because I didn't find any. Perhaps if you make that journey, you'll find facts that maybe I overlooked, and then you could present me with those facts, and I could further investigate. Right now, all I'm hearing is, well, I don't know why I'm still a Christian, which is an appeal to personal incredulity. It's not up to me to convince you that you're wrong. It's up to you to ask yourself if you're right, and to investigate to find out, to be willing to challenge what you hold most dear. That's up to you. That's not up to me. But if you want arguments, and if you want evidence, I've got plenty of those. All you have to do is ask.
Maybe because, well, their evidence is so horrible, once they give you Z, they go right back to A. So, you want evidence of Christianity? I got loads of it. 353 fulfilled prophecies fulfilled by Jesus Christ.
This demonstrates to me your lack of theological understanding. Much of the Torah, which is what you know as the Old Testament, was altered, and the rabbis know it was altered, and they point out the fact that it was altered, to align with this Savior that the Christians either invented, or maybe it was real, I don't know. But nonetheless, they altered the text to fit the situation. And the other way could be true too, that Jesus is a completely made up character, and they wrote it in such a way that it seems like he's fulfilling all of these prophecies. If you write something after the fact, it's very easy to make it look like this character that doesn't exist did everything that was written that he would do. That's simple. That's basic. That's easy. How do we know Jesus is real? That's the question. And even if you could somehow demonstrate that Jesus really existed, and demonstrate that he fulfilled all these prophecies, that doesn't mean anything. It's not impressive to me, because that could be completely by luck. Or it could be that there was a lot of prophecies, and the ones that he didn't fulfill were simply thrown out. Who knows? And even if somebody fulfills a prophecy or two, what is the number that they have to hit before they are now a magical being? Because I can make a lot of accurate predictions about what's going to happen using scientific data, and I can be completely accurate with all of that, and I can make self-fulfilling prophecies and be right about that. But what is the magical number that I need to have to matter? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think you know the answer either. But no, you're just doing piss poor theology at this point. Moving on.
The consistency of the Bible.
By consistency, you mean the overwhelming contradictions in the Bible?
The harmoniousness of the Bible.
I don't see why that would be relevant.
The 4 different eyewitness accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John,
which sometimes contradict each other, and none of which is corroborated by anything else, and we don't even know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John existed. You have to show that they existed, and you have to show that the events happened, which you can't do. You're using the Bible to prove that the Bible is true. That's circular reasoning.
The high standard of morality in the Bible.
Alright, I know you have more video, but I'm done. I'm seriously done now. I know you have more logical fallacies, but I am done because you cannot be serious. The high morality, stoning people to death is high morality? If you really believe that, then I want nothing to do with you. And yes, viewers, I was serious. I am done at this point. The number of logical fallacies so far is 24. Number of formal fallacies is 6. Please do note, as always, formal fallacies are not anything other than an indication that the person using logic has made an error or doesn't really understand logic that well. And then I added another counter for the number of logical fallacies that he got wrong, because he would say the name of a logical fallacy and then proceed to explain it completely wrong in some way, shape, or form, or so confusing that it might as well be wrong. So that's that number. Did we have any empirical evidence? No, we did not. Did we have any repeatable tests? No, we did not. Did we have a logically coherent argument? Most certainly, we did not. So, without any of those, we must continue to be skeptical of his conclusion, which is that atheism is fiction, which was highly dubious in the first place, because atheism isn't fiction. There are people that are atheists, so clearly it's not fiction. So that was just a poor choosing of a title in general. But regardless, unless and until we have a logically coherent argument, we have to continue to be skeptical of his conclusions.